Wisconsin's top election officials' fate rests in the hands of the state Supreme Court, with more debate over whether Meagan Wolfe should have to leave her post after Republicans voted to fire her. CBS 58's Emilee Fannon, WisPolitics editor J.R. Ross break down the controversy in tonight's Capital Connection.
We begin this week taking a look at the fate of the state's chief election officer. That's Meagan Wolfe, who is currently serving as the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Now, oral arguments were presented before the court, basically whether or not she can stay in her job after her term expired. Now, Wolfe and WEC are under the impression that she can stay there because a lower court determined that she could. However, what justices really grappled with over this issue that was brought forth by conservatives is that why should they have to replace Wolfe when the court just decided 2 years ago that appointees can remain in their role past their term when it is expired. Now, Jared, this was an issue that was a much bigger deal 2 years ago because we had a big presidential election that occurred just a few weeks ago. But what happens next is the big question, and how much will it matter going forward? Yeah, so there are two big kind of paths that the court could take. One, holdover appointments. Sounds real sexy, I know, for people at home on TV, but it's basically you can continue to serve in a appointed role beyond your term. The court, when it had a conservative majority, said you could with a member of the Natural Resources Board. Now the roles are reversed. The liberals kind of want Wolfe in this position, that's perception at least. So did the liberals, who were all in the minority of that decision a couple years ago, reverse positions and say, yes, you can stay, much like the conservatives said 2 years ago? Or it's a separate track. That question is, do you have a duty as the Elections Commission to appoint somebody new? When the law was written, it clearly said that you'd have a 4-year term as the administrator. But attorneys for the Elections Commission argued there's no clear language in that statute that says you shall appoint someone new every 4 years. So does that mean that Wolfe can stay? Again, to your point, yes, there's a big Supreme Court race in the spring, state superintendent race. There's not a big general election anytime soon. There's less pressure on the situation, but still it's a huge question for who serves in that role going forward and how are appointments treated in state government if they go beyond their required term. And speaking of justices, we're now going to highlight a former justice who we haven't talked about in quite some time, but it's Michael Gableman, because there was a 75-page complaint filed against him for basically lying and harassing public officials during his investigation into the 2020 election. Remember, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos hired him to really dive deep into possible allegations of fraud and some of these election conspiracy theories in wake of former President Donald Trump's loss 4 years ago. But he never produced any results. He cost taxpayers a whopping $2.3 million for his review that didn't really find anything. So in this complaint, it really alleges that he wasn't professional throughout much of the 14-month investigation. Also, he lied to the public, he lied to his client, and lied to the regulators at the office. I don't mean to chuckle, but that's not a great tact when you're being investigated for something. So let's back up. Gableman tried to have the mayors of Madison and Green Bay jailed if they would comply with subpoenas that he issued. He told the public and courts that they were not working with them. In reality, they were. So there's that issue. With his client, Robin Vos, the Assembly Speaker, and the Assembly in general, he signed a contract that has certain terms to it. In a different proceeding in California about an attorney that he kind of worked with, he admitted that he didn't take those terms seriously. He intended all along to pressure Robin Vos to allow him more time and more resources to go back and look at 2020 and maybe look at the overturning of the election. Okay, that's not great either. Third, the office, he gave an affidavit saying, I didn't have an actual attorney-client relationship with these folks. Well, the contract says it's for legal services. Again, not an attorney, but usually that's a clear sign what you're trying to do. Look, the big thing for Gableman is, what's the penalty going to be? He's a first-time offender with OLR, if he's guilty of these things. Usually, you get a slap on the wrist, a private reprimand if you're an attorney who has a case not like this, but a case before the agency. He, though, is a former justice. He also led this charge to try and overturn the 2020 election results. People asked me this week, does that put a bigger target on his back in terms of we want to make an example of you, don't do this kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, it's going to take months on end. So now the process is there's a referee appointed. They kind of go through this hearing if he wants to. Then the Supreme Court of Wisconsin ultimately decides what penalty you will face.
the body he used to serve on with some of the justices now on that court.
All right, and our last topic this week is looking at how schools are performing overall. Those are the report cards that the Department of Public Instruction releases every year based on the 2023-2024 school year. Now, their report concluded that 94% of schools are meeting expectations. However, critics argue they drastically changes the formula of how they grade each student in each classroom. Therefore, it's extremely difficult to compare from years past on whether there are improvements. Now, looking at, say, Milwaukee, for example, they got three stars, on their report card, which means they meet expectations. But if you ask people in Milwaukee, they don't really believe that.
No, and lawmakers, I'm sure you talked to lawmakers as well this week, they don't believe it either. And that's part of the pushback against Jill Underly, state superintendent, that this is not a true measure of schools. Looking forward, will it come up in the spring race? So she's seeking re-election in a 4-year term. They got endorsed this past week by the State Democratic Party. That's a big deal because the party has lots of resources. It's a big help for candidates and campaigns. Will this issue, though, bite her come election time in spring? Oh, by the way, also Supreme Court race, the ballot at the same time. That may overshadow this race by a great deal because there'll be way more resources put into the Supreme Court than a DPI race.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, that will do it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us.